There are women in Amish communities right now growing more food than their neighbors, on worse soil without a single bag of fertilizer from the garden center and without ever once Googling what to do. And the most unsettling part? Their grandmothers did the same thing, and their grandmothers before them. Most of us have been taught that poor soil is a problem you fix with products. You buy the amendment, you follow the instructions on the bag, and you hope for the best. But the Amish never bought into that idea because they never had to. They inherited something far more valuable than a product. They inherited a method. In this video, I am going to walk you through 12 gardening habits the Amish have practiced for generations. Habits that most Americans have never tried and that work precisely because they work with the soil instead of against it. Some of these will surprise you. One of them might make you a little uncomfortable because it asks you to think further ahead than next season. But every single one of them is something you can bring into your own garden starting this year. If you have been struggling with soil that feels like cement or a garden that never quite produces what it should, stay with me. What you are about to learn changes the way you look at the ground beneath your feet. And before we begin, if you want to go deeper into ancestral gardening wisdom, everything I talk about here and so much more is waiting for you at ancestralbeauty.shop. It is a resource built for women who want to grow, preserve, and live with the same intention these communities have carried for centuries. The link is right below this video. Now, let us begin. The first thing you need to understand about Amish gardeners is that they do not think in seasons. They think in years, and nothing proves that more than the very first habit on this list. Most of us, when we move into a new home or decide to start a garden in a neglected corner of the yard, do one thing. We dig, we add whatever soil amendment the hardware store had on sale, and we plant. We are impatient. We want to harvest this summer. And so we work with whatever soil we have, and we wonder why things never quite take off. The Amish do something that feels almost radical by comparison. When they identify a plot of land they want to garden, even land with poor, compacted, depleted soil, they do not rush to plant food in it. They spend the first year planting what they call nutrient builders, clover, alfalfa, deep-rooted legumes that push down into the earth, break up the compaction, and quietly fix nitrogen into the soil. Not for this year's harvest, but for the harvest 3 years from now. They cut those plants down and leave them on the surface as natural mulch. They do not harvest a single thing from that bed in year 1. In year 2, they layer in compost, aged manure, and mineral amendments like crushed eggshells. They plant buckwheat, let it grow, cut it down again before it seeds, and work it into the soil. Another year of building, another year of not harvesting. By year 3, the soil has transformed. The structure has changed. The fertility is not borrowed, it is built. And what grows in that soil in year 3 grows differently than anything you have ever pulled from a bed you prepared in a weekend. Now, I know what you are thinking. I do not have 3 years to wait. But here is the thing. You do not have to start from zero. You can begin this process in one corner of your garden today. And while that corner is being built, the rest of your garden keeps going. The Amish did not build their soil all at once either. They built it plot by plot, season by season, over a lifetime. That patience is not a disadvantage. It is the whole point. But there is one habit that surprised me more than any other on this list, because it comes from something most of us throw away every single winter. If you heat your home with wood, or if you know someone who does, you have access to one of the most underused soil amendments in traditional gardening: wood ash. Amish families collect the ash from their stoves all winter long, storing it in covered containers until spring. And when planting season comes, they dust it lightly around their tomatoes, their peppers, their fruit trees, a thin, careful layer. Wood ash carries potassium, calcium, and phosphorus. It neutralizes acidic soil the same way lime does, but it costs nothing, and it comes from your own hearth. For women gardening on a tight budget, this is the kind of knowledge that quietly changes everything. But here is what almost nobody tells you, and this is important. More is not better. In fact, too much wood ash raises your soil pH so high that your plants cannot absorb the nutrients already in the ground, and your yields actually drop. The Amish are precise about this. A light dusting, not a blanket. If you are unsure, test your soil first, which we will talk about in just a moment, and apply ash only where you know the pH needs balancing. This is what separates Amish gardening from the kind of folk wisdom that sounds good but does not actually work. They observe, they measure, they apply carefully, and the result is soil that improves year after year without spending $1 at the garden center. Now, speaking of plants working together underground, let us talk about a combination so old it has been used on this continent for thousands of years, and most people have heard of it. But almost nobody understands the real reason it works. You have probably heard of the three sisters: corn, beans, and squash planted together. It is often talked about as a space-saving trick, a clever way to pack more into a small garden. And yes, it does that. But that is not why the Amish use it, especially not in poor soil. What is actually happening beneath the surface is something much more interesting. The corn grows tall and exhausts nitrogen from the upper soil layers. But the beans climbing that same corn stalk are actively fixing nitrogen back into the ground as they grow, replacing what the corn takes. Meanwhile, the squash spreads wide at ground level, its broad leaves shading the soil so completely that weeds cannot get enough light to germinate. And the roots of all three crops reach into completely different layers of the earth. They are not competing, they are cooperating. In poor soil, this matters enormously. You are not just growing 3 crops in one bed. You are running a self-correcting fertility system. The plants are feeding each other in ways that no synthetic fertilizer can replicate because a fertilizer feeds the plant. The 3 sisters feed the soil. If you have never tried this combination, this is the season to do it. Find a bed with the most difficult soil in your garden. Plant it exactly as the Amish do, and watch what happens, not just above the ground, but what the soil feels like when you put your hand in it at the end of the season. And while we are talking about working with less space, the next habit is about spacing your plants in a way that most modern gardening guides get completely wrong. Walk into a typical American vegetable garden and you will see rows, wide rows with wide paths between them, the way it has been taught in books and extension programs for generations. There is logic to it. You need to walk between the plants to tend them. But the Amish, particularly in their kitchen gardens, do something different. They plant densely, not carelessly, deliberately. They calculate how close plants can grow so that when they reach their full leaf spread, the foliage of one plant just barely touches the foliage of its neighbor. What that canopy does is remarkable. It shades the soil surface completely. Weed seeds sitting in the ground cannot get the light they need to germinate. Moisture that would evaporate from bare soil stays locked in. Soil temperature is regulated, and because weeds are suppressed naturally, the Amish spend far less time on their hands and knees pulling them. For women managing a garden alone without help, this matters. Every hour you are not weeding is an hour you are doing something else. The dense canopy is not laziness, it is engineering. The key is knowing which plants tolerate close spacing and which do not. Leafy greens, beets, carrots, and onions do beautifully in dense beds. Tomatoes and squash need more room. The Amish learn this by observation, season after season, watching which arrangements produce the most with the least intervention, and then they do it the same way, reliably, every year. Now, the next habit is one that took me a moment to fully appreciate, because on the surface it sounds like it belongs in a fairy tale. But stay with me, the Amish plant by the moon. I know how that sounds. But before you decide it is superstition, let me tell you what is actually happening when a community follows a lunar planting calendar for generations. Root crops, carrots, potatoes, beets, turnips, are planted during the waning moon when gravitational pull is drawing moisture downward. The belief is that this encourages roots to follow that pull and grow deep. Above ground crops, tomatoes, beans, lettuce, cabbage, are planted during the waxing moon when moisture is being drawn upward through the plant. Now, the science on lunar gardening is genuinely mixed. Honest researchers will tell you the evidence is not conclusive. But here is what is not mixed at all. Communities that garden by the moon plant with extraordinary intentionality. They never put seeds in the ground randomly. They plan, they track, they observe and record, and over generations, that discipline accumulates into something that looks a lot like wisdom, regardless of whether the moon is doing what they think it is. The practical gift of lunar planting is not magic. It is a forcing function for paying attention, and paying attention season after season is exactly what separates a garden that barely produces from one that feeds a family through winter. If you want to try it, start simply. Use the waxing moon for your above-ground crops this season. Use the waning moon for anything you are growing underground. Keep notes. See what you notice. And speaking of things hidden beneath the surface, the next habit is one that most people completely overlook in autumn, which is exactly when it matters most. Every fall, the Amish plant a second time, not food they will harvest, a crop they will bury, winter rye, field peas, crimson clover. These go into the ground after the summer harvest is done. When most gardeners are cleaning up and closing down for the season, they grow through the cool months, sometimes right through light frosts, and then in early spring, before they flower and set seed, the Amish cut them down and work them into the soil. What gets released in that decomposition is extraordinary: nitrogen, organic matter, root channels left behind by the dying plants that allow air and water to move through soil that was compacted the season before. The soil does not sit bare and exposed all winter, losing nutrients to rain and wind and freeze-thaw cycles. It is covered, it is alive, it is being fed. This is not a new idea. Farmers have known about cover crops for centuries, but the number of home gardeners who actually practice it is astonishingly small. Most people think of autumn as the end of the gardening year. The Amish think of autumn as the beginning of next year's harvest. If you do nothing else from this video, plant a cover crop this fall. Rye seed is inexpensive and easy to find. Broadcast it over your empty beds, water it in, and let it grow. What you will put your hands into next spring will be different, softer, darker, more alive. Now, here is something about the Amish that surprised me, because it challenges a very comfortable assumption most of us carry about traditional communities. Many families in Amish communities, particularly in the Midwest, send soil samples to professional laboratories. Real laboratories with real scientists running real tests on the chemistry of their ground. The Rodale Institute, which has studied organic farming systems for decades, has documented that well-managed Amish-style organic systems consistently match conventional fertilizer-based yields and outperform them during drought years. But the Amish do not achieve this by guessing. They know their soil's pH, they know its nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels, they know precisely what is missing and what is abundant, and they amend accordingly. This matters because it destroys the idea that traditional gardening is just feeling your way through the dark. The Amish combine ancestral wisdom with careful observation and, when available, real data. They are not romantic about it. They want their crops to grow, and they do what works. You do not need to send samples to a lab in Omaha to apply this principle. A basic home soil test kit costs less than $10 and takes 20 minutes. Knowing your soil pH alone will tell you whether your amendments are working, whether you need lime or sulfur, whether your plants are struggling to absorb nutrients that are technically present but locked up by the wrong chemistry. Test your soil. It is the single most practical thing you can do before you buy another bag of anything. And once you know what your soil needs, the next habit is one of the most effective ways to deliver it, but only if you apply it at exactly the right time. Aged manure is one of the oldest soil amendments in human history. The Amish use it extensively, from cattle, from poultry, from whatever animals share their property. But the way they use it is specific, and the timing is everything. Fresh manure burns roots. The nitrogen content is too concentrated. It can introduce pathogens into food crops. The Amish never apply fresh manure to a bed they are about to plant in. They age it, composting it for 6 months to a year, until it has broken down into something dark, crumbly, and mild smelling. And then they apply it in autumn, not spring. That is the detail most people miss. Autumn application gives the manure an entire winter to integrate into the soil. Freezing and thawing cycles break it down further. Rain carries nutrients deeper into the root zone. By the time planting season arrives in spring, those nutrients are not sitting on the surface waiting to wash away. They are part of the soil. If you have chickens, if you have access to a nearby farm, if a neighbor keeps horses, the resource is often closer than you think. Ask. Most people with animals are looking for someone to take the manure off their hands. You receive fertility for free. They receive the favor of a cleared pen. It is the Amish logic applied to a modern neighborhood. Now, the next habit is one that feels almost too simple, but in poor soil, it may be the one that makes the biggest visible difference of everything on this list. The Amish apply mulch the way most of us apply an afterthought, except they do not. They take it seriously, deeply seriously. Around their plants, they lay straw or hay in layers thick enough to matter, 10 centimeters, 15, sometimes more. Not a thin decorative sprinkle, but a genuine insulating blanket over the soil. What that depth does goes beyond what most people expect from mulch. In summer, it keeps soil cool when heat would otherwise stress shallow roots and dry the surface into concrete. In spring and fall, when night temperatures drop unexpectedly, it holds warmth in the soil the way a thick quilt holds warmth around a sleeping body. It extends the planting season on both ends, and as it breaks down, slowly, over months, It adds organic matter to the soil beneath it, improving structure and fertility without any additional effort. For poor soil especially, this is critical. Bare soil in summer loses moisture within hours. Bare soil in spring heaves and crusts with every rain and dry cycle. Mulched soil stays workable. It stays hospitable. Earthworms, which are the single best indicator of soil health, congregate beneath deep mulch because the conditions are exactly what they prefer: moist, cool, dark, and rich in decaying organic matter. The Amish are not tidy mulchers. They are generous ones, and in that generosity their soil improves season after season almost without trying. One more thing the Amish collect carefully, and it is not from a store, and it is not from an animal. It falls from the sky. Rainwater is not the same as tap water, and Amish gardeners have always known this. Tap water in most American municipalities contains chlorine, added to kill bacteria in the water supply. That chlorine does not disappear when you water your garden. It affects the microbial life in your soil. The beneficial bacteria and fungi that make nutrients available to plant roots are sensitive to chlorine. Not dramatically, not all at once, but over time, regular irrigation with chlorinated tap water works quietly against the living ecosystem you are trying to build. Rainwater, by contrast, is slightly acidic, typically a pH between 5.5 and 6.5, which falls right in the ideal range for most vegetables. It carries no chlorine, and it arrives when it comes at the temperature and pace that soil organisms are adapted to. The Amish collect it in barrels positioned at every downspout. They gravity feed it to their gardens through simple tubing. No electricity, no pump, no water bill, and their plants receive irrigation that is genuinely better, chemically and biologically, than what comes from a municipal tap. 2 or 3 rain barrels at your downspouts can collect hundreds of gallons in a single storm. In dry stretches, that water is the difference between a garden that struggles and one that keeps going, and it costs, after the initial barrel, nothing. Now, the last habit on this list is the one that took me longest to understand, because it is not something one woman does alone. It is something a community does together. The Amish do not buy seeds every spring the way most gardeners do. They save them, but more than that, they trade them. Within Amish communities, seed exchanges happen regularly, informally, between families and neighbors. A woman who had a particularly strong tomato year saves those seeds and passes them to her sister-in-law. That sister-in-law grows them the following season, selects the best performers from her soil and her conditions, saves those seeds, and passes them on again. What this creates over decades is something no seed company can manufacture. Seeds that are genetically adapted quietly, gradually, without anyone orchestrating it, to the specific soils, microclimates, and growing conditions of that particular community. Those seeds germinate better in that soil than anything from a commercial packet because they have been selected year after year by the land itself. This is not mystical. It is basic plant genetics applied with patience and community, and it is the single most powerful long-term strategy on this list because the return compounds with every generation of seed that passes through the same soil. You do not need an Amish community to begin this practice. You need a packet of open-pollinated or heirloom seeds, never hybrid because hybrids do not breed true and the discipline to save your best performers at the end of each season. Label them, store them cool and dry, plant them next year, save the best again. In 10 years, you will have something no catalog sells. You will have seeds that belong to your garden specifically, seeds that your grandmother would recognize, not because they are old, but because they are yours. 12 habits, and not one of them requires a trip to the garden center. What the Amish understood, and what most of us were never taught, is that a garden is not a project you finish. It is a relationship you tend. You build the soil before you plant in it. You feed the earth before you ask it to feed you. You save the seeds that worked, and you pass them forward. Poor soil is not a dead end. It is a starting point. And with the patience and intention these women have carried for generations, it becomes something remarkable. If this way of gardening speaks to you, if you want to go further into ancestral wisdom for the home, the garden, and the table, come find us at ancestralbeauty.shop. Everything we believe about living with intention is there waiting for you. And if this video gave you something real today, share it with a woman in your life who grows things. She needs to know this too.